Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. It was a Thursday evening, the kind that dripped with mundane routines. The rain started around dusk, soft at first, then quickly swelling into a heavy downpour, each drop hammering the pavement like tiny fists. I had just finished a poetry reading at the local bookstore, a small but loyal crowd huddled around, sipping their coffees and nodding along politely to my verses. The poems I read that night had been about love, how naive that seems now, but love seen through the filter of years, familiar, worn, but still comforting. I left the bookstore feeling drained, the good kind of tired, like I had left a piece of myself there in those words. The drive home was slower than usual, rain slashing against the windshield in erratic bursts. Laura hadn't called or texted to check when I'd be back, which wasn't unusual. We'd long fallen into the kind of relationship where our silences were often mistaken for comfort. I thought little of it as I pulled into our driveway, the house dim and quiet. I stepped inside, shaking off the cold. The house smelled faintly of sandalwood, the kind Laura liked to burn in her incense holders. There was a stillness to the place, an absence of the usual sounds, no soft classical music playing from the kitchen radio, no gentle hum of the television. It was the sort of silence that made me instinctively hold my breath. I called out for her, my voice sounding unnatural in the void. "Laura." I called again, louder this time. Nothing. Just the rain, pounding harder now, like it was trying to drown out everything else. My stomach tightened, a flicker of unease darting through me. I put down my coat and bag and made my way through the hallway, heading toward the bedroom. That's when I noticed the door, slightly ajar, the soft amber glow of the bedside lamp spilling through the crack. "Laura." I pushed the door open, and the words died in my throat. The scene before me was surreal, like something out of a bad dream I couldn't wake from. Laura was there, but not in the way I had expected. She was tied to the bed, her wrists bound to the headboard with thick, red ropes, her body completely exposed, stark against the white sheets. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her skin glistening under the lamplight. And standing beside her was Tom. Tom, our neighbor, the man who had helped us move our furniture just 6 months ago, the man whose barbecue parties we attended, whose wife had baked us a casserole when we first moved into the neighborhood. He was standing there, fully clothed, his hand resting possessively on Laura's bare hip, his eyes locked on mine the moment I stepped into the room. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, but my voice came out low, barely audible over the rain. Tom didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just stood there, his face twisted into a smirk that made my skin crawl. Laura, though, Laura's eyes widened in shock, a panic that flared hot and immediate, but not from fear. No, this was something else. It was the panic of someone caught, the guilt that flooded in too late. "Daniel." She started, her voice trembling as she tugged uselessly at the ropes that held her. "This isn't." I couldn't even comprehend her words. They sounded far away, muffled by the sudden roar of blood in my ears. Everything inside me went numb, as though my mind had decided it was easier to shut down than process the reality in front of me. There was something so grotesque, so alien about the way she looked tied there, like a stranger. I couldn't believe this was happening. Tom finally spoke, his voice calm, condescending. "You weren't supposed to be home this early, Daniel," he said, as if I had merely interrupted an inconvenient meeting, as if this whole nightmare was a matter of scheduling. "We weren't expecting you." I stared at him, my hands trembling. "What the hell is this?" The question slipped out, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. But I didn't really need an answer. I knew what this was. It was betrayal, plain and simple. Tom just shrugged, his grip still on Laura, casually possessive. "It's not what it looks like," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching in an almost sneer. "It's complicated." "Get your hands off her," I said, the words escaping through clenched teeth. I could feel the anger rising in me, hot and bitter, but it felt muted somehow, as if this moment was happening to someone else. This wasn't me. This wasn't my life. Laura whimpered. Her eyes were wet now, desperate, and she finally found her voice. Daniel, please. It's not what you think, she stammered, pulling against the ropes as if trying to cover herself, but there was nowhere to hide. I didn't mean for this to happen. My gaze shot to her, and the rage bubbled up, sharp and cold. You didn't mean for this to happen. Really? What did you think was going to happen? I spat, my voice louder than I intended. I couldn't stop the questions that tumbled out, each one harsher than the last. Was this some kind of game to you? Something fun? Something exciting? Tears streamed down her face, and she shook her head frantically. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely able to meet my eyes. I'm so sorry. I turned away, disgusted, my breath coming in short, painful bursts. The sight of her, the reality of this, all of it was too much. I took a step back, trying to breathe, trying to regain control. I don't care, I said finally, the words hollow as they left my mouth. I don't care anymore. I walked out. I didn't stop to hear any more of their excuses or apologies. The rain greeted me like an old friend, cold and merciless. I didn't feel the chill, though. I didn't feel anything. Not the rain, not the wind, not the cold. I just kept walking. It wasn't until I reached the end of the street that I realized I hadn't even grabbed my coat. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. The only sound left was the steady rhythm of rain, and the echoes of the life I once thought was mine. In the weeks following that dreadful night, I found myself trapped in a haze of disbelief and anger. I moved into a small, dimly lit motel on the edge of town, a place with peeling wallpaper and an overbearing stench of mildew. It was the kind of place you stayed in when you needed to be away from everything, away from the echoes of betrayal that clung to my home like cobwebs. During the day, I wandered aimlessly through the city, a ghost of my former self. I'd sit in parks, cafes, and bookstores, seeking solace in the mundanity of everyday life, trying to convince myself that I was somehow still part of it. But inside, I was a wreck. My mind constantly replayed that night, Laura tied to the bed, Tom standing over her with that sickening smirk. I knew I needed something to focus on, something to channel this overwhelming sense of rage. Then one night, as I sat in the motel room, staring blankly at the TV, the idea came to me like a thunderclap: poetry. I had used words to heal before, why not use them to exact my revenge? I reached for my laptop, the screen flickering to life with a cold blue light. I opened a new document and began to write, pouring out my anger and pain into verse. The words flowed easily, each poem a slice of my shattered soul, each line a stab at Laura and Tom's betrayal. One poem was titled The Shattered Illusion, and it began, "What was once a sanctuary, now lies torn, in shadows, where the truth is mourned. An altar turned to treachery's guise, with bloodied hands and shattered lies." I spent hours each night crafting the collection, which I titled The Ties That Bind. Each poem was a raw, brutal exploration of the pain I felt. I published the first few anonymously on a small poetry website, not expecting much. But when the responses started coming in, comments, shares, discussions, I knew I had struck a chord. It wasn't long before my poems began circulating on social media, gaining traction. My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers sharing their own stories of betrayal, thanking me for giving voice to their pain. But it was my old friends who really took notice. One afternoon, as I sat in the dingy motel lobby nursing a cup of tepid coffee, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lydia, an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. "Hey Daniel, saw your poems. Powerful stuff. We need to talk. Call me." I dialed her number, my hands shaking slightly. "Daniel." Lydia's voice was warm and familiar, a contrast to the cold world I felt trapped in. "I'm so sorry to hear about what happened. I can't believe it. It's been a hell of a few weeks," I said, my voice cracking. I didn't expect the poems to go viral. It's surreal. Well, they've certainly made waves, Lydia said. People are talking. And a lot of people are supporting you. We want to help. Help? How? I asked, the bitterness in my voice barely masked. Lydia hesitated for a moment. We're planning a reading. A public reading. It's a chance to share your story with a larger audience. To make sure Laura and Tom faced the consequences of their actions. The idea struck me immediately. A public reading would mean more eyes on the truth, more voices echoing my pain. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about making sure they understood the full extent of the damage they had caused. All right, I said, a grim determination settling in my chest. Let's do it. In the weeks leading up to the reading, Lydia and I worked tirelessly. She used her connections to secure a venue, a cozy yet vibrant cafe that hosted local poetry events. The place was perfect for what I had in mind, intimate enough for raw, emotional impact, yet large enough to ensure a significant turnout. On the night of the reading, the cafe was packed. The air buzzed with anticipation, the room filled with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of coffee cups. I stood backstage, my palms sweating as I held the stack of poems, each page a testament to my anguish. Lydia found me just before the reading began. She was a whirlwind of energy, her eyes bright with excitement. You're going to do great, she said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. This is your moment. Thanks, I replied, though my voice was barely above a whisper. I just hope it makes an impact. When it was my turn to step onto the stage, I took a deep breath and walked out, the audience's eyes turning toward me with curious expectation. I introduced myself, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Good evening, I began. My name is Daniel, and I've written a series of poems about a personal betrayal, a betrayal that has rocked my world in ways I never imagined. I could see Laura and Tom in the crowd, seated at a table near the back. Laura's face was pale, her eyes fixed on the floor, while Tom sat beside her, his posture tense. The sight of them only fueled my resolve. I started reading the poems, each word infused with the raw pain and anger I had felt. The room was silent, every word landing with the weight of a hammer blow. The audience listened, rapt and moved, their faces reflecting the intensity of the emotions I poured into my verses. As I reached the final poem, I looked directly at Laura and Tom, my voice rising with a fierce clarity. You thought you could shatter what we had, in shadows, where our love was clad. But know this truth in every line, our bond is broken, yours and mine. The room erupted into applause as I finished, but I barely heard it. I was too consumed by the sight of Laura's tear-streaked face and Tom's clenched jaw. The victory felt hollow, the revenge less satisfying than I had hoped. When the reading ended, Lydia found me again, her expression a mix of pride and concern. You did it, she said, hugging me tightly. You made your voice heard. Yeah, I said, my voice trailing off. But at what cost? As I packed up my things, I glanced back at Laura and Tom one last time. The aftermath of the reading was bittersweet. I had exposed the truth, but the healing I had hoped for seemed elusive. The battle was far from over, and the journey ahead was uncertain. For now, all I could do was wait and see where this path of revenge would lead me, knowing that the real challenge lay in understanding how to move forward from the wreckage of what had once been my life. The day of the reading was overcast and chilly, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy I had hoped to feel. The cafe, normally a warm and inviting space, now seemed to pulse with a charged tension. People had come from all corners of the city, some out of genuine interest, others from curiosity stirred by the viral poems. I arrived early to set up, the usual pre-reading jitters exacerbated by the knowledge that this was more than just another event. This was a confrontation. Lydia and I had planned every detail meticulously, but the weight of the impending confrontation pressed heavily on me. The cafe's ambient lighting was dim, casting a soft glow over the room that was meant to be intimate but now felt oppressively close. The crowd was a mix of poetry lovers, friends, and the curious, their murmurs creating a low hum of anticipation. I could see Laura and Tom at a table near the back, trying to blend into the crowd. Laura's face was flushed, her expression a mix of anxiety and defiance. Tom sat beside her, his posture rigid, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Daniel," Lydia said, finding me behind the makeshift stage. Her voice was soothing, a comforting presence amidst my growing unease. "Are you ready?" I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "As ready as I'll ever be," she gave me a reassuring smile. "You've got this. Just remember, you're telling your story. You're not alone." The room gradually quieted as the event began. I took the stage, the spotlight warming my face, casting shadows across the room. I glanced briefly at Laura and Tom. Their presence was like a physical weight on my chest. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice echoing slightly in the hushed room. "Thank you for coming. Tonight, I'm going to share something deeply personal, my experience of betrayal and how it's transformed into the poetry I've been publishing." The audience was silent, their attention rapt. I took a deep breath and began to read from The Ties That Bind. Each poem was a visceral recounting of that night, the shock, the pain, the betrayal. As I read, I could see the impact my words had on the audience. Some were visibly moved, others uncomfortable, but all were engrossed. Halfway through the reading, I noticed Laura shift uncomfortably in her seat. She looked at Tom, who had his eyes fixed on me, his expression hard and unreadable. I decided to address them directly, to bring the confrontation to the forefront. "Laura," I said, my voice carrying over the silence. "Tom. I see you there. I know this is difficult, but I need you to hear these words." Laura's face turned a deeper shade of red, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking some kind of refuge. Tom's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "You have to understand," I continued, "that these poems are not just about me. They're about everyone who's been hurt, who's been betrayed. They're about confronting that pain and finding a way to heal from it." A murmur ran through the crowd, a ripple of shared emotion and discomfort. I read on, my words resonating in the stillness. Each line felt like a confrontation, a revelation of the deep scars left by that night. When I finished, the room erupted into applause. The clapping was thunderous, a validation of my pain and anger, but it also felt like a hollow victory. I looked back at Laura and Tom, expecting to feel a surge of triumph, but instead, I saw the profound effect it had on them, Laura's tears, Tom's stony expression, the way they clung to each other, as if trying to make sense of their own turmoil. As the crowd began to disperse, Lydia approached me, her face a mixture of pride and concern. "That was incredible," she said, embracing me. "You really got your message across." "Thanks," I replied, though my voice was hollow. "But it doesn't feel like enough. I thought I'd find closure, but all I feel is emptiness." We walked over to where Laura and Tom were standing. Laura looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Daniel, she started, her voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Tom cut her off, his tone defensive. "This wasn't supposed to get out of hand. We never meant for it to go this far." I looked at him, my anger flaring. "You think this is about you? About what you meant or didn't mean? It's about what you did. The consequences of your actions." Laura reached out tentatively. "Daniel, please, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't make up for what happened, but I'm trying to understand, to make things right." I shook my head, the words feeling inadequate in the face of my emotions. "I don't know what to say. I don't know if there's anything to say." Lydia stepped in, her voice gentle but firm. "Daniel, maybe it's time to step away, to give yourself some space. This moment, this confrontation, it's important, but it's only the beginning of the process." I nodded, though the advice felt insufficient. I turned away from Laura and Tom, walking toward the exit with Lydia beside me. As we left the cafe, the cool evening air hit me like a splash of cold water. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering sense of emptiness. The public reading had achieved its purpose, it had exposed the truth and stirred a reaction. But in the end, it hadn't given me the closure I had hoped for. The road ahead was still uncertain. I had faced my demons publicly, but the real journey lay in how I would come to terms with this new reality, and how I would find a path forward from the wreckage of my past. In the weeks that followed the public reading, the intensity of my anger began to wane, replaced by a quiet, unsettling emptiness. I had exposed the truth, and while the reaction had been powerful, it hadn't brought the resolution I had hoped for. Instead, I found myself adrift, grappling with the fallout of my actions and the lingering pain that seemed to follow me like a shadow. I continued to stay at the motel, avoiding the empty silence of my old home. My interactions with friends were sporadic, and I spent most of my days writing and reflecting. The poems had given me a voice, but now I needed something more, something to help me move beyond the anger and find a sense of peace. One evening, as I sat at a small desk in the motel room, working on a new poem, my phone rang. It was Lydia. "Hey, Daniel," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "How are you holding up?" "Hey, Lydia," I replied, trying to sound upbeat despite the heaviness I felt. "I'm managing. Still writing, still trying to make sense of everything." "That's good," she said. "Listen, I've been thinking. You've poured so much of yourself into your work. Maybe it's time to focus on healing, not just for yourself, but for others who might be going through similar struggles." I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. Healing. I thought that's what I was doing. I thought the poetry would help me move on. "It's a start," Lydia said, "but maybe there's more you can do. You've already shown so much courage. Why not channel that into something positive?" Her words struck a chord. I realized she was right. I needed to move beyond the cycle of anger and pain. My writing had been a way to confront my emotions, but perhaps it was time to use it to build something new, something that could help others as well. The idea took shape quickly. I decided to organize a series of workshops and support groups for people dealing with betrayal and personal trauma. I reached out to local community centers and mental health organizations, proposing a series of sessions where people could share their stories, find support, and use creative writing as a tool for healing. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to participate, and soon, I found myself leading a group of individuals who had all experienced various forms of personal betrayal. The sessions were raw and emotional, but also incredibly cathartic. One evening, after a particularly moving session, I was approached by a young woman named Emily, whose story had resonated deeply with the group. She had been through a painful breakup and was struggling to move on. "Daniel," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Your poems and these workshops, they've really helped me. I didn't know how to deal with my feelings, but now I'm starting to see a way forward." I smiled at her, feeling a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm glad to hear that, Emily. It means a lot to know that sharing our stories can make a difference." Another participant, Mark, who had been grappling with a betrayal from a close friend, nodded in agreement. "I never thought talking about it would help, but this group, it's been a lifeline. I've started writing again, and it feels like I'm finally starting to heal." The support group sessions became a cornerstone of my new routine, and through them, I found a renewed sense of purpose. Helping others confront their pain and find their own paths to healing became a source of strength for me. It was a way to turn my personal suffering into something meaningful and constructive. One day, as I was preparing for a new workshop, I received an unexpected call from Laura. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of anxiety and curiosity. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of regret and determination. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I know this doesn't excuse anything, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry." I took a deep breath. "Laura, I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you yet, but I appreciate you reaching out. It's been a long road, and I'm still trying to make sense of everything." "I understand," Laura said. "I just wanted to say that I'm working on myself, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I hope one day we can find some peace, even if it's just for ourselves." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time, I felt a small shift inside me. Maybe, I said, but for now, I need to focus on the work I'm doing. It's helping me, and I hope it can help others too. As I hung up, I felt a sense of resolution settle over me. The road to forgiveness was still uncertain, but I was beginning to see that healing didn't always mean reconciling with the past. Sometimes, it meant forging a new path forward, one that acknowledged the pain but also embraced the possibility of renewal. In the weeks that followed, I continued to lead the workshops, my focus shifting from anger and betrayal to healing and growth. The process wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and sadness, but the work I was doing gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as I wrapped up a workshop and the participants began to leave, I stood by the door, watching them go with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Each person carried a story, a journey, and in some small way, I felt connected to them through the shared experience of overcoming pain. Lydia joined me as the room cleared out, her eyes shining with pride. "You've done something incredible here, Daniel," she said. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," I said, feeling a genuine smile tug at my lips. "It's been a difficult journey, but I think I'm finally starting to find my way." As I left the community center that night, I looked up at the sky, the stars visible through the clearing clouds. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. The journey wasn't over, but I was beginning to see that even in the midst of pain, there could be new beginnings, new paths to explore. And as I walked home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that my experiences, my poetry, and the work I was doing could help others find their own way through the darkness and into the light.